Meeting will please come to order. Please stand for the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. I behave myself.
All persons who anticipate speaking on any public hearing item must fill out an oath card to be heard on the agenda item and sign the oath obtained therein. These cards are located on a table near the entrance of the council chamber and may be obtained from the recording secretary. This meeting will be conducted in accordance with the procedures adopted in Resolution 24-1997. Those speaking in favor of a request will be heard first, those opposed will be heard second, and those who wish to make a public comment on the item will speak third. The applicant may make a brief rebuttal if necessary. A representative from either side, for or against, may cross-examine a witness. Anyone who speaks is considered a witness. If you have photographs, sketches, or documents that you desire for the commission to consider, they must be submitted into evidence and be retained by the city. Please submit such exhibits to the recording secretary. Do we have any cards on this? Anyone to speak tonight?
Not at this time.
Okay, thank you. So,
We
staff?
need to do roll call.
Oh, I'm sorry. Roll call, please.
Chairman Williams. Vice Chairman Shavir.
Here.
Secretary Chambers.
Here.
Member Faison.
Here.
Dr. Faison.
Yes.
Member Baker. Member Ritchie.
Here.
Member Noel Copeland.
Here.
School Board Member Hare.
Here.
We have a quorum, so we'll continue with the meeting. Staff?
I'm sorry, what is your question? Is everything has been advertised?
We need approval of the minutes.
Yeah, you do need to.
We have approval for the minutes.
Minutes, yeah.
I'm sorry.
I think you need to make a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved. Roll call, please.
Well, I think you need a second from a non-chair.
I'll second.
Okay.
Roll call. As you can see, I don't do this very often.
Member Faison.
Yes.
Vice Chairman Shavir.
Yes.
Member Ritchie.
Yes.
Secretary Chambers.
Yes.
Dr. Faison.
This is confusing. Yes.
Member Noel Copeland.
Okay, we have approval of the minutes. Staff?
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Dr. Faison.
I was just saying that we need to continue and who can speak. And
Oh, I'm sorry.
do that.
Has anyone visited the site or spoke to anyone about the topics being presented tonight?
No.
No, okay. So we can proceed. Staff?
Okay, so the first item tonight is item 9A, your new business. You have 4 items tonight. 3 of them we have presentations about, and then the very last item is item D, has to do with a conditional use permit. I don't know if the chair wants to entertain a motion from the commission to maybe reorganize the structure of tonight's meeting and handle the conditional use permit first, and then we will address the other items, the presentations to you right after that. But that's
Mr. Chair,
To move item D to the A position.
second.
All those in favor? All those opposed?
okay. The conditional use permit before you tonight starts on page 221 of your packet. I also did give you a hard copy separate to that for this conditional use permit. The request tonight is for a conditional use permit to allow a school at the location of 5650 South Washington Avenue. The applicant is PBS Corporation on behalf of George Nicotarian of Parish Medical Center, and they're requesting this conditional use on property that is currently 5+ acres. The The zoning on the property is OP, which is office professional, and in this zoning district, a school is required to go through a conditional use process, and so that permit needs to be approved prior to them going forward with establishing the school at this location. There is a building at this location now, which has a daycare, and so they are hoping to use a portion of the building for the new school. The building was constructed in 2000. It's about almost 14,000 square feet. They are not proposing any changes to the building or to the layout of the site. We are not proposing any additional conditions other than what is already established in the code. So if this conditional use permit is approved, they'll just have to meet all the conditions of the code. That includes landscaping, buffers, and any distance requirements for playground equipment from residential areas, which I do not believe are even located near this area. This property, if you're not aware, is located in the south part of the city. If you're going north on US 1, Washington, going into the city, you'll see it on your left side, and just beyond that, there is a car dealership on the north side of that.
Excuse me.
Yes, sir.
Can I just interrupt? Can you give us a few minutes to read this, and then you can proceed with your presentation? I think it might help us a little bit to get a little head start on what you're speaking about, if we could do that.
Okay.
Okay, so let's take a few minutes and read what staff has prepared for us, and then we'll go back to the comments. Thank you.
Will you say again what the present use is?
The building is currently being used for a daycare facility. And the applicant is hoping to use a portion of the building for a school.
How far is it away from the Bricks project, which serves beer and alcohol?
Can we go back to my original? Can't we just read this? I have to.
I read it.
There is a school down there, or daycare.
I'll try and have an answer for you about the distance from the Bricks property. The distance from the Bricks property is just under 2,000 feet, according to the property appraiser's measuring tool that I'm using here. Bricks
It's a
Brewery.
owned by the Playland Brewery. It's
Yeah, how far, that was another question I would have.
yeah, it's 200 yards,
No, 2,000 feet.
2,000 feet.
And the state requires a minimum separation of 500 feet between a school
500.
and,
Okay.
right.
All right, that was my question.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that now.
All right, staff.
The area that you,
Can we continue on? Thank you.
Sure. So I was just going to refer you to. Thank you. So page 228 of your packet, you'll see an aerial of the site. And then on page 229, you'll see a zoning map that we included. And you'll see the property is currently zoned OP, which is the office professional. On page 231 of the application, of your packet rather, there's the application. The applicant is, I'll just read what the applicant is stating as far as their intended use here. The school will provide educational services to individuals with special needs using evidence-based strategies to foster academic achievement, social and emotional growth and independence, and executive functioning based on each individual's unique learning profile. The BPS Schools is a private school, and our intentions are to start our school small by leasing classroom number 6 from the Children's Center. The classroom number 6 is less than 1,000 square feet. We ask that you to carefully consider our request, as we are anxious to start helping the children in need of our services. That was the narrative portion of the application. On the staff report, you'll see some conditions on page 27 of your packet. Those conditions are a repeat of what's in our code already. So, okay. Well, if you like. Yeah. Yes, sir. If you look on that on the last page of the staff report, you'll see some conditions. But those are basically a repeat of what's in the code already.
What kind of school this was to be? Kindergarten, first grade, what?
They indicated to us that it will be a special, provide educational services to individuals with special needs. So they did not indicate this. That's correct. They did not indicate the grades, but because the code requires that they're establishing a school that's similar to any other established school, regardless of grades, that they would have to go through this process.
So this is for a one-room school?
Correct.
It's one classroom?
As far as the application is stating that it's only for classroom 6, which is under 1,000 square feet.
But if this goes through, they could expand to the entire building because it will now be zoned for a school?
No. If they want to expand to another classroom, they would have to come back and amend this conditional use permit and bring it back
Okay, so the
before you.
conditional use permit is literally for one room?
For what they are requesting here, yes.
For
ma'am.
just one schoolroom? Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Are there any other questions of staff? Do I have a motion on this item?
So moved.
Do we have a roll call, please?
What was the motion?
My movement was for.
Oh, the motion is to approve CUP number 2-2017.
Vice Chairman Shavir?
Yes.
Member Ritchie?
Yes.
Member Faison?
Yes.
Secretary Chambers?
Yes.
Dr. Faison?
Yes.
Member Noel Copeland?
Yes.
Thank you. So going back to your original schedule, the first item tonight is item A, and that has to do with a comprehensive plan draft vision-based amendments. Before I start, I just want to give you a background about what we're presenting you tonight. These are primarily comprehensive plan related policies and amendments to our city's growth management document. If you recall, last year we went ahead and sent a letter to the state Department of Economic Opportunity, informing them that we were going to go through what's called an EAR process. And part of that means we have to look at our comprehensive plan to determine which policies need to be updated according to new state laws that have been enacted since the last time we did this. We also got direction from the City Council to go forward with a visioning exercise with the public. And so this is a two-part project. So what we have you tonight first are the first draft of a reformatted comprehensive plan, just for informational purposes only. There's no need for an action on this unless you would like to do that. This draft that will be presented to you right now by Trevor, he'll go through some slides of a presentation that was previously shown to you. that was developed by our consultant, Kane and Associates, out of Orlando. They did workshops with the public back in November rather, and then summarized all the results of those workshops into a vision document that was approved by City Council in January, and it was also presented to you by Trevor back at that time as well. So what he's going to show you tonight is, and what we submitted to you, is a draft rework or restructure of our current comprehensive plan based on that vision exercise and that vision document. So after the presentation, we'll take any questions you have on this first item. But just so you know, it's really just for informational purposes right now. We want to find out what you think, basically. Do you think we're going in the right direction with the consultant? And if so, we'll continue to work with the consultant. And you'll see another version of this later on this summer. So with that, I'll turn it over to Trevor, and afterwards we'll take any questions.
Are we dealing, is this starting in our agenda packet?
Yes, sir. The first item starts on page 6 of your agenda, and it goes on to page 25.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Okay, and so what's in your packet is basically the proposed layout, a draft structure, again, as Brad said, just for informational purposes to see if we're headed down the right track with our consultant. But prior to getting into that, I wanted to go through an abbreviated version of the presentation that was given by the consultant previously. And so basically from the visioning process, the consultant identified with input from the public, the stakeholder group, 3 keys basically to the vision. That includes the downtown, the waterfront, and the gateways. Within those areas, the downtown, there's a core area that they identified, which is kind of near the historic district that's more or less in the core of downtown, and then they identified a larger secondary area, and I'll discuss that shortly.
Trevor?
Yeah.
What page is that on in the packet?
This is just a presentation. It was not included in your packet.
Thank you.
The second area that was identified through this process is the waterfront, and part of that would be a goal to achieve basically a 6-mile waterfront trail. The reason being is that's basically the amount of shoreline between the Max Brewer Bridge and down to the Columbia Bridge that goes over to the Space Center. The third area are the gateways, which are more or less Garden Street, South Street, Cheney Highway, and US 1. And so briefly, how did we get to the vision? As Brad said, there were 3 workshops that were held. 2 were public input meetings. The third was a results meeting. The consultant answered any questions and kind of explained the next steps, which is what we're working on currently. At the first workshop, the public was invited to participate in a strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities analysis, which is also known as a SWOT analysis, and also a community values survey. And the community values survey was essentially the consultant showed a series of images of different, more or less different typologies of development in downtown areas, along corridor type areas, and then along waterfronts. And people voted on a scale of +5 for they really like it, and -5 for they don't like it so much. And so that's what occurred at the first meeting. At the second meeting, the consultant basically summarized and presented the results of the SWOT analysis and the community value survey. They also did a presentation about value of place-based design, which I'll go over some of those concepts here shortly. And then they also broke out into 3 group sessions. People could go to whatever table interested them the most, and basically that was broken down into the waterfront, the gateways, and the downtown. So you'll see that recurring theme over and over. Those 3 key areas are what was focused on throughout this process and used to guide the discussion to form the vision. And so for the place-based design, they went into a presentation and did a good explanation of how place-based design is good for not only people but also for the city in terms of increasing tax revenues, creating places that people want to be, and that sort of thing. And so part of that value-based or place-based planning is creating value, and that's places for all ages, meaning young families with toddlers, children can go and enjoy them, same as an elderly person who is out, doing their daily shopping, those sorts of things. And that creates a cohesive environment that everyone feels comfortable, everyone feels safe, and is accessible to all users, including anyone with disabilities and those sorts of things. Also, creating value, it's places for businesses. So if you create an inclusive environment, businesses want to go there because that's where people want to go, where they can easily access and get to. And also places for community. And so these are areas that events can be held, people can gather, they feel comfortable and safe in these places, and that, again, are building on the first two, where they should be located in close proximity to businesses, and again, should be easily accessible by all users. And so the three, more or less, the key points from the meetings, there's good regional context that we can take advantage of. The city must grow smartly, mainly through quality redevelopment and infill. So we don't have a whole lot of land that we can expand outward onto, because we have the lagoon, the St. Johns River, and other constraints that we will mainly have to focus on redevelopment and infill developments over continuing to expand the city limits. And there again, placemaking creates economic, fiscal, and social value for the city, and also, of course, for the residents and visitors. So the Titusville stakeholders, the group that participated in the meetings, what the consultant found is that they really value the small town feel and character the city currently has, the waterfront, and the historical downtown. And another thing that the consultant took away was that the stakeholders are very engaged, and they're passionate about getting the next phase of development in town done properly. So to elaborate a little bit on the three areas that the consultant identified, the gateways, again, Garden, South Street, US 1, and Cheney Highway. These pictures I know are somewhat small, but basically what people tended to like, the green boxes you see there are votes that were positive from the members of where you see 1, 2, 5, and 24. Those numbers are basically representative of positive votes. People felt that those were appropriate ways that the corridors could be redeveloped. And what you'll see there is buildings that are a little closer to the street, increased landscaping, outdoor seating, things that increase aesthetic values, and also add to areas that people can take advantage of the weather here and eat and do those sorts of things in outdoor settings. And some of the things that were not voted so highly, as you see on the bottom two photos there that are illustrated by the red boxes, are more of the typical development that occurred, in the 1960s, where it's just a lot of parking right next to the street, buildings are set back much further, and everything is very automobile oriented. So there again, this is a couple of the bigger photos. This was voted not so favorably as compared to something where the building again is closer to the street. There's a better landscaping. There's things and activities for people to do. The waterfront. So here again, part of this is protect and enhance the waterfront, and part of that it would be introducing additional trails and access to the waterfront by the public, and also visitors, of course, to run, walk, bicycle, watch rocket launches. And so this was a conceptual image that they put together for one of the existing waterfront walkways. To really all you see here is they added some landscaping more or less and some people, but creating those comfortable shaded walkways for people to be able to enjoy is certainly something that would draw more people to the waterfront. And so some of the activities that they identified and were brought up through the public input process was, access to the water, again, for a variety of different items, not just, walking and bicycling and those things, but being able to enjoy dinner along the water, maybe go to dinner by boat rather than having to drive a car. Again, waterfront boardwalks, having kayak launches, those sorts of things that aren't as intense as necessarily a marina or other things like that. And then moving on into the third area, which is downtown. Again, they broke this down into two areas. The downtown core, which is illustrated more or less on here. So for the area more or less from Broad Street to South Street, and then from the Indian River Lagoon over to the Florida East Coast Railway. And In this area, some of these images are going to be repetitive. You've seen some of these before, but basically focusing on good pedestrian environment, making sure that people feel comfortable and that they can support the local businesses that would prefer to locate downtown. So here again, some of the images, supporting cycling, having the trail in downtown. Some of these things were already in the beginning phases of. The coast-to-coast connector is done through this part of the state already, and so continuing to build upon that and really see that as an asset. People voted that very highly. The bottom image there on the right-hand side got a 3.92 out of 5, which the consultant was very surprised that they considered that a very, very high vote. And they do a similar process elsewhere, and they said that it's rare that you see a lot of images get that high a score across the board. And so here again, activities in the core, you see outdoor dining, areas for street festivals, little cozy areas that people feel comfortable being in and they want to spend time in. And that includes areas like sidewalk cafes, little areas like that, and really activating some of the current spaces that are available in downtown. And so the secondary area here is the area that's kind of still within downtown, certainly, but not necessarily right in that core area. So what you see here is the core is now in the white, and the rest of the area, what they're considering the secondary area, is more or less in that yellow or kind of brown tan color. And the focus here would be more so to promote residential uses, get people living downtown so they can take advantage of the other infrastructure and activities that are available downtown, and that includes a variety of scales and types of residential uses, single family, some multifamily, a variety really to create a mixed environment so that it's accessible for multiple income levels, multiple users, all the way from a person fresh out of college that just needs a little one-bedroom apartment all the way up to a family that just chooses to live close to the downtown core. And so here again, you see the potential uses. This is identified. The historic core is listed on there. Those are the historic buildings that are more or less in downtown. The public land are properties that are currently owned by the city. So, one of those is City Hall, the fire station, Julie Street parking lot. Those areas are public land. And then what they're proposing again around there is residential and mixed use in the rest of the core. And then mainly residential uses on the outside of that, again, to increase that residential density and get people living in close proximity to where they can hopefully have a more walkable lifestyle if they so choose. And so the secondary shopping area, you see these uses are kind of less intense. They're more pedestrian scaled, neighborhood friendly, so they can be located in very close proximity to residential uses, including office uses, and then of course residential uses. And as I said, you have single-family homes here. These are probably multifamily townhomes or small-scale condos, those sorts of things. So really getting a variety of typologies of housing, so that it's not just one type that people pretty much have to either like it or don't. And so the key findings that the consultant found through all 3 workshops were what they did is they had a long list of these findings and strategies, and they basically had everyone that was at the public meeting come up and just put a check. Yes, they agree with this. No, they didn't. And these are the four because we had a tie for second place that were the top of the list for everyone that participated. And so these initiatives, meaning what the consultant is proposing in focusing on the 3 areas, the waterfront, the downtown, and the gateways, will effectively reposition the city in a very positive way. One of the second ones was the city needs to develop an effective redevelopment and infill strategy. The second one that came in second place was the city needs to reimagine 3 key areas, the downtown, the waterfront, and the gateways. And number 3 was a vibrant downtown is an essential element in the overall economic development strategy for the city. So from those strategies that were voted upon by the members of the public meetings, the next steps then were to align the goals and objectives of the comprehensive plan with the vision. So all the public meetings basically culminated in the vision, but that in itself is not a roadmap as to how to get to accomplish the vision. So the first step in that is to amend the comprehensive plan, and that is kind of the first step of what we're doing right now. And again, the kind of a subset of those would be to create a waterfront trail master plan, a form-based code, and redevelopment plan for the downtown, which we will bring you more information on that at your next meeting this month. And then the third one is design guidelines for the gateways, which can address things such as aesthetics of buildings, increased landscaping standards, certain pedestrian improvements. So things that help increase the aesthetics of our gateways, which is something that was repeated several times throughout all of the public hearings the public meetings that we had. And then integrate kind of all of those things with a transportation and roadway plan so that the private improvements and the public improvements all are accomplishing the same goal and everyone's kind of on the same page and speaking the same language. And so that's basically the vision map that was presented along with the vision document highlighting those three areas. And so again, as Brad said, that was the vision. The next thing that we'll talk about is the proposed layout that is in your packet, and that starts more or less on page 9. The consultant is proposing to reorganize the comprehensive plan. Right now it's broken out into very much silos of everything dealing with land uses in one chapter, everything dealing with transportation is in another, and so on and so forth. But that doesn't necessarily have to be the case. You have to address certain things per state statutes, but you don't have to separate them all out into individual chapters. And so part of what the consultant is proposing is that there are certainly going to be policies that address items citywide, and so that will be one set of goals and policies. And then there will be more or less 3 or 4 different chapters that address those 3 key areas. And the fourth one in that they're proposing is neighborhoods, which will address our existing single-family development. And that should certainly be addressed, and they felt that was important, as do we. And so they're including an element about that. And then additionally, they are proposing another element, which this can, like I said, this is conceptual, and we're just trying to get your feedback as to if we're on the right page as far as employment opportunities and then additional supporting elements. And so those are laid out on the following pages. I'm not going to go through all those in detail. But again, we're wanting your feedback on this, see if you generally agree with the concept. We will certainly bring multiple drafts of this back to you before any action is taken. And so with that, we'll be happy to answer any questions or elaborate if you would like.
We have any questions? I'd like to make a comment. We have had, in the years past, I don't know how far back these visioning concepts go, but it seems like we've had them every year or two. And while I think it's great to have this in front of us to remind us of what we would like to accomplish, it doesn't seem to be moving. We don't seem to be moving forward on a lot of these visionings that we have. And I see here that perhaps I didn't bring up our past plan, but it seems like this has changed just a little bit. So having said that, I would like to know, it's great to have these plans, but when do we start moving? We had the Garden Street corridor, which was a few years ago. We were supposed to have planters and landscaping and new trees and all of that. And we were supposed to have the streetscapes for Hopkins Avenue, and we still haven't started on that. And I think these visioning projects are great, and I love what we see. But when do we actually vote to spend the money to start making these improvements?
Part of these are certainly public improvements that do cost the city money. Other things are, plans and regulations that control private development on private pieces of property. And private development can certainly help accomplish the goal of the public through proper regulation and standards and that sort of thing. I will say that the resurfacing and landscaping improvements along Hopkins Avenue are going to start this year. So I know you've been hearing about that for a long time, but the money and project is nearing the start point, and so once you see that started, it will move forward. And so I will say that in the past, you're right, that there have been several visioning activities done. The one thing that I have noticed from looking back at past visioning exercises is that more or less, a lot of times the same outcomes occur. You know, people are concerned about aesthetics on the gateways, they're concerned about the downtown, and of course the waterfront. So in my opinion, I don't view that as a bad thing. To me, that means that people are still concerned about the same things and that we're not now radically changing our vision of what the city should be. So I think that I personally am happy as staff member with the results of the vision, because it gives us a clear goal, and this visioning exercise also kind of reaffirms what we already thought people wanted, but this new visioning exercise, I think, definitely clarified that, so that we weren't kind of just going on what we thought. Now it's more or less the will of the public that we're trying to fulfill. And so, but how do we get started? Basically, this comp plan is the first step. It's the guiding document. It's the long-term vision. And from there, we hope to include a work program basically to set goals for ourselves as the planning department and other departments to move forward with other plans, with making changes to our regulations so that these goals that are in the comprehensive plan can be accomplished. I can't give you an exact time frame. Sometimes things occur quickly, but some other items are very much a long-term goal that we really don't have a whole lot of control over. So I don't have a short answer for you on that one, to be honest.
I'll turn this over in just a minute to the commission, but I guess what I would like to see happen is for something, a particular project, to start. In other words, we have all these visioning projects that over the years we've had several of these meetings, and I would like very much for the city to pick something, a project on a property or a section of the city, and actually start moving on it. It's like Hopkins, okay, the streetscape. This has been several years. We've had this plan, and I really expected it to start like 2 years ago. And here we are, still haven't done it. So I really would like to emphasize, let's start. Even in Hopkins, if you just do a couple of blocks, at least you got started. At least people have some opportunity, some idea to see what the city has in mind. Because we keep doing this. We keep coming up with these visionings, and then we don't do anything. Anyway, that's just my... I'll turn this over to next.
Vice Chairman,
Yes.
I'm just letting you know there's 2 members of the public signed up to speak, just so you know.
Well, we will have Bill Klein, did you want to?
Yes.
Please.
Thank you. I'm Bill Klein and live in Titusville, 3 Indian River Avenue. I wasn't able to attend the former meetings where this plan was being developed because I was out of town, but I like what I see. I see a lot of nice things being done. One of the things I would like to see more of that I don't see in the plan is more of the detail of shoreline restoration along the waterfront. Like the very first picture I saw tonight showed some like rocky areas, maybe where some oysters would be, and some tall grasses along the waterfront. That's good. That's really good. What I didn't see in the further pictures was like when they show a picture of the big grassy area and the concrete sidewalk and nothing else around it. The only improvement was putting in some trees. Now, one of the things that the DEP in Florida has provided is money for living shoreline projects. And what they say, living shorelines are established by the creation of a natural marsh of planted native fast-growing plants such as alligator flag, pickerel weed, sand cordgrass, and bog rush. The marsh provides shallow water habitat for marine animals, absorbs and reduces wave energy, captures sediment, improves water quality, reduces pollution through wetland filtration, and decreases damaging effect of storms and floods. See, that's what should be along the waterfront wherever possible. One area that received a lot of damage during Hurricane Irma was along the Max Brewer Bridge, where it washed out. A lot of land, sidewalks fell in. Over by Astronaut Park, a big platform fell in. And this was because the mangroves and shoreline plants that used to be there were removed in this development. Now, if you look at the Harbor Point condos, the mangroves, there was a natural barrier that was required to be in there when it was built with mangroves, palm trees. I've taken a lot of pictures. The water, we were between two parks from the city. Both of them were severely damaged. Our area, granted, the topsoil, maybe 2 or 3 inches deep, was washed away. The trees that were there, you could see the roots that were exposed, which have been covered now, but I took pictures and it shows how the trees held the land together and protected the land. So what I'd like to see is, as you develop the plan, to spend more detail, and especially areas like along Max Brewer Bridge. There's a park right across from the new Titus Landing. Some other parks that you all have in Titusville see really good shoreline restoration done there using native plants. And then we could probably have some signs. Like one area that you all have done a good job is Drave Park, with that water area there and the plants around it. And so I'm just saying I love what you're doing, and I'd like to see more details of going into the shoreline restoration along the waterfront. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So Bill took my notes. I'm Marlis Breckel. I live at 3 Indian River Avenue. I looked over the Titusville Tomorrow website on the computer this afternoon and studied it a bit. And one of my things was the vegetation along the shoreline. Another thing is trees. If we're going to have all those nice trees, we better start planting some. And it seems like, and I noticed this at Dray Park, we don't seem to understand that when you plant a tree, you need to water it. You need to water it until it's fully established, maybe for as long as 6 months, until that tree's had a chance to take root. You can't just plant trees and walk away from them. I saw those trees planted at Dray Park and went back a month later and they were dead, dry. I don't want to see that in this. I don't want to waste our money planting trees that we're not going to take care of, or even putting beautiful plants on the downtown, the hanging plants, and not watering them. We need to learn to do that. And the other thing I think we should be careful of is when we make these beautiful places for people to gather, to use permeable surfaces so that the rainwater and stormwater can drain down into the aquifer and not run off with all that dirt and automobile grease into the lagoon.
You know, we had that same problem on Harrison Street. We planted maybe 10 trees years ago, and the city watered them for maybe a month, and then that was the end of that, and I think they're all dead. So, you know, a considerably waste of effort, and we've never gone back and replanted those trees and taken care of them properly on that wide strip there. Anyway, thank you.
I have a...
I'm sorry, it's Suzanne, I'm sorry.
No, she's first.
You're right. I'm sorry.
I have a couple comments I'd like to make. I did notice on some of the pictures that you displayed that the ones that were negative were the ones that were just like basically concrete parking lots, buildings with no trees and landscaping. That's probably one of my biggest beefs about the city as well. I would like to see a continual landscape plan that covers the entire road, that would tie everything together with, you know, continual palm trees or, you know, whatever you want to use. And I see quite a few like crepe myrtles. They're pretty in themselves when they're in bloom, which is maybe 2 months. Half the year they look like they're dead because they're deciduous trees. There's so many deciduous trees that are planted. We live in Florida. We can have plants that are green year round. Why don't we do that? Why do we have all these deciduous trees? you bring, you have all the tourists come in, and when they come to Florida, that's what they expect to see is green, not a tree that looks like it's dead half the year. I just think we need to do more Floridian-type trees and plants and do a landscape plan that continues the theme all the way down the road. And it would really it would be very warm and inviting to anybody that's visiting the area. I think this is a really important thing. And I know that some of the landscaping is done by FDOT, but, if we could have some input with them, because, it is our city, we're the ones that live here. I think we should have some kind of input, with FDOT as far as the landscaping, because they do have quite a few crepe myrtles there, like along 50 and such. But I know there's a lot of buildings that don't have any landscape at all in front of them. And I think that's really important to have the landscaping. It's very, very inviting. It's just good for the city. Another question I had is you're proposing a 6-mile trail between the 405 Causeway all the way up to the Max Brewer Bridge. I don't understand how you propose to do that when you've got private subdivisions. I mean, I live in one of them along the river. I mean, that's private property. How do you propose to incorporate a trail along that corridor? Do you want to go ahead and answer that?
Yeah, sure. Basically, the intent of that is to be along the waterfront as much as possible. However, we also understand that, like you said, there's a lot of private property that is already developed. And so on that, the city can certainly work with property owners to come to an agreement if they are willing to grant an easement or something like that. But if not, there's certainly still opportunities to utilize the US 1 right-of-way to make a trail that does connect all of those access points to the waterfront without forcing a private property owner to give up an easement or something like that.
That's kind of what I was thinking, that you would probably just go out along, US 1 or whatever to continue
Certainly.
the trail.
So it would certainly weave back and forth between being as close as possible within reason to the waterfront and still connecting those areas along US 1.
Now, that trail that you're talking about, is it going to be just for walking, or is it going to include like bicycles and rollerblading and, to incorporate a lot of activity?
We haven't gotten that far yet. However, I think the end goal would probably to make it as much of a multi-user trail as possible to accommodate, a variety of different activities.
Because that would be awesome to be able to have that distance that people could get their exercise in, whether they just do 1 mile, 6 miles, or double it and do 12 up and back. I think that's really important. But the landscaping and that railway, is there any proposal for the parking situation for the city? There's just not enough parking here in the downtown area for people to come and park and be able to utilize the...
That's certainly something that that can be addressed more or less at a later point by doing one of the, as you saw earlier in the presentation, the downtown plan certainly probably needs to be looked at and updated. It's been many years or several years since it's been updated last. But the level of the comprehensive plan is a little too broad encompassing to really specifically deal with that kind of issue, but it can certainly be looked at in the future as we move forward with other like smaller area plans for the downtown and for other areas throughout the city.
And I think the last thing I want to address is we have all these trails, the bike trails and everything, so you can do your bike, you can do your run. I think one thing that it would be a real probably expense for the city, but I think a swim facility. I've actually had some athletes approach me, even people from Europe are expressing an interest in wanting to come over. And because you have triathletes and swimmers and things like that. But if you had a swim facility where people could come and, swim their laps and whatever, it would be, I know myself, I used to do triathlons, but it would be a real boon to, you would bring so many athletes here to Titusville to incorporate into their training. It's just a thought that, because you've got the the college. You know, they've got a lot of ground there where you could easily put an Olympic-sized pool in there or something like that.
Member Ritchie, let me just clarify. I think you're asking for, because the city's trying to become what's called a trail town. We're trying to accommodate the 3 regional trails that will eventually come to the city. One is already completed in the city, and one that's going to be started soon, I think. Another one that's long-term. So it's a lot of opportunity for the city to become a more recreational destination. So are you talking about maybe looking into other opportunities for recreation to build on that focus of
Right, because then
becoming a
you'd
trail?
have people come in here and they would utilize the trails, and you got, the wildlife sanctuary where they can do a lot of biking and running, that type of activity. But I think incorporating some kind of swim facility would be very beneficial to that as well. You would get a lot of people, like I said, there's been an expression of people from Europe, people that come from the north in the wintertime, things like that. I think a swim facility would be very advantageous, even for the locals. I mean, the locals would utilize that as well. I think that's all I have for now.
Yeah. I'd like to add a comment to that. The city does have the opportunity, along with the county, to restore the pool at the Royal Oak Golf Club, Country Club. And if the city and the county could get together and restore that building and the pool there and turn it into a municipal situation where that pool can be used for events, I think that would be kind of an interesting addition to what the city wants to do. And I think there's a lot of opportunity if, in fact, it would come to fruition that we could acquire Royal Oak for the community as a whole and take that, as a long-term investment for the future in terms of open space and park and different events. And I would I've mentioned this before, and I would love to see that happen. I don't know what the status of Royal Oak is at the present time, but we have mentioned in the past that perhaps the owners of that property or the disputed owners of that property could be approached and in some way make this happen so that the county and the city partner on that particular piece of property. That's just an idea. No.
It's me now.
Who's two?
So,
Okay, I'm sorry.
my
down
two
John.
comments are, I would like to see for most of these things, which ones the city owns and which items we influence, because we can't do a lot of these things, right? It's working with other departments or working with other people. So I think it would be important to understand which items we can ourselves do versus which items we need to influence whoever that is, whether it's FDOT or the county or the state or whoever. And then I think the other thing that would be important is, to the point earlier about it feels like nothing happens, like we talk about a bunch of stuff and then nothing happens. I think it's important to identify for pretty much all of these items the impact, high, medium, and low, and the effort, high, medium, and low. Because if you've got things on here that are high impact and low effort, we should do them immediately and, pick all that low-hanging fruit. I mean, there's one on this last page that's sequencing traffic lights. Like, how hard can that possibly be? And that's one that is something that people complain about all the time. If you could get that right, like, that would be a big win with pretty low effort, I would think. So I think that if you did those two things, and I think then that draws toward that roadmap of what can we get accomplished near term, mid-term, long term, and you can start really showing forward progress so it doesn't feel like we have a lot of great ideas and never do anything.
Yes, the gateway. I've had concern for the gateway over a period of years now. And particularly out on 50, it's been a real concern of mine. And it looks like the median looks like a desert out there most times. And if the gate is attractive, then I think that would be inviting in terms of the tourists that we have come through our area heading over to the Space Center. But tell me about whose responsibility it is and how is it funded, the median on the state roads and the federal roads.
My understanding about the Florida Department of Transportation managed roads, if the city wants to install landscaping in medians or along right-of-way that is owned by FDOT, typically what FDOT will do is ask for an agreement with the city that the city will maintain it. And of course, it have to be approved by FDOT, so it's for safety and for other, there are other requirements, whatever that may be. I know the city has done that already with some of the landscaping you see in our downtown, and that's pretty typical of a lot of wherever FDOT owns roads in cities around the state. So,
you know, downtown we've had some things, yes.
Yes.
Let's get back to the gate. Back to the gate again.
It would be the same situation. I mean, they would ask us to maintain that landscaping.
Well, we've been doing a very poor job of maintaining. Where does the funding come from?
Typically, I mean, in our case, just throw out, it could probably come from our general fund. If we wanted to work with FDOT and install landscaping in medians or along the right-of-way along that Area 50 that you're talking about, for example. Or there may be some other funding source that we may have. But typically, it would probably be the city, the one who'd be doing that, unless there was a grant or some other source outside the city. But working with FDOT, they would ask the city to maintain that, most likely.
To maintain it, if they would fund it, the city would maintain it. Is this what we're?
No, funding would most likely come from the city. I don't think FDOT would set aside monies for landscaping that they are not required to put in.
I see other cities, even Cocoa, their entrance is attractive.
Right.
Orlando, Winter Park, I can keep naming them, but our gates are shabby, and we need to do something about it.
I believe we did put in, there are strategies in here that were recommended by the consultant for us to develop a landscape master plan or even work with FDOT on those issues. So it's something we have these strategies and policies in place. It's something that gives the city the emphasis to go forward and have that conversation with FDOT.
Another thing you could do is you could partner with like local nurseries and have them like sponsor a section, you know, with a little sign that says this is sponsored and maintained by whatever their name is. It's just another potential for finding a way to maintain it outside of the city funds. I mean, and that's also works as free advertising for that organization for people driving by and saying, that's really nice. And it's got a sign right there that says, you know, owned and maintained by whoever nursery. It's another alternative.
Is there I'm back at Highway 50 and South Street again. Is there an irrigation, is there water there? You wouldn't know that.
I couldn't answer if there's irrigation in those medians.
Right, but it just doesn't. It's not appetizing. It's a mess, dry, and something just needs to be done there.
Understood. If you would like to, maybe we could certainly. It sounds like it's a really big concern of yours, and I know other members have expressed the same concern as well in the past. We could certainly work with the consultant to make sure that we flesh out that policy and the strategies that are related to it, to be more specific, and we run that by you.
If the gate's advertising, and it's nice, and we expect, you know, to find good things in the city, but if it's drab, you don't expect much out of it.
I have a question for staff. Would it be worthwhile for this commission to have a special meeting sometime in the future to discuss the gateway and the beautification actually of, say, Highway 50, Garden Street, and the shoreline waterfront. And the reason I might suggest that and bring it to staff, and perhaps you can discuss that with sometime in the future, in the near future, maybe we should get more specific. Maybe we should have a meeting as to what it is that we could do on these particular entryways and see if we can't bring something to fruition. In other words, have a little bit more of a design in mind, in place, so that when the time comes and we can keep talking about it and seeing if we can push things along. I realize there are budgets involved when you're doing this, but without, if you have a plan, a visioning of what you want and what this should look like, then it just keeps it in front of council that perhaps we need to start funding some of these ideas to bring them forward. And I'd like to know what staff thinks about having special meetings just specifically on one or two issues that we can discuss in detail.
We can certainly come back at your regular meetings and give you short presentations or lengthy presentations, however you like, on these different items. In fact, your next meeting, we were planning on doing a short presentation on one of the topics in this comp plan, which happens to do with the design standards for the downtown and revising the development standards down there. So that's one issue, and we can certainly come back at your other meetings and give you presentations and information about other topics as well. Absolutely.
Yeah, I would like staff to do that, because it's what things kind of get lost. You know, we have these visionings, and then all of a sudden time goes by, and next thing you know, we're talking about it next year. So in order to keep that topic moving forward, let's put that on an agenda sometime within the next 2 or 3 meetings so that we can keep this fresh in our minds, and perhaps we can get staff and the planning department to start thinking about, because I'm sure that you're going to have to call people in if you're going to have this done professionally. I don't know if we have professionals on staff that can do this designing for these different shoreline and streetscapes. And I think we need to do that. Thank you.
I agree. I'm sorry, I don't remember your name, but about the watering of the plants, that's imperative. If you know, why spend all that money and time on plants if you're not going to water them? And once they're established to a certain point, you don't have to do it quite as much, but you're going to need some type of irrigation in the medians and different areas for certain landscapes to keep them lush. And other ones, once they're established, you really won't need much at all. But the water situation is a big item as well. So I don't know if we have anything in here to incorporate irrigation in the medians or not.
We will revisit the policies with the consultant and address your concerns with them. Okay. So we'll flesh that out with the consultant. Yes, sir.
Some years back, I know we had the gray water or wastewater, however it may be, piped throughout the city. During that period of time, did we put any into the median?
We do still have a reclaimed water system in the city. It's primarily in the area of critical concern, the 2 aquifer recharge areas. But as far as actually providing irrigation in the medians, I don't know. We can look into it and get back to you.
I'd appreciate that.
Sure.
Yeah, I tell you, now that Dr. Payson has brought that up, I think that in other cities they do that. And that's how you keep these trees going. You know, it's great to have these plants and put the trees in, and we water them for a few months, and then the next thing you know, we get sidetracked and we're on to something else, and we hope nature takes care of it. And it doesn't work out that way. It hasn't so far in all the years that I've seen us plant trees. They all die. And so maybe we really need to take a serious look at doing irrigation. And if we did it in segments, you know, you don't have to do the entire city all at once, but you can certainly do an area like on Highway 50, the corridor there, and start irrigation. However, the city would do that through wells, I'm assuming. And maybe we need to really start looking at irrigation for all the trees that we do plant.
About 4 or 5 years ago, on our meetings here at the board, it was brought up, someone mentioned something about parking for downtown. I remember we voted on, before Titus Landing was started, there was a recommendation that they build a large parking facility, the city, and they could, charge for parking there all day or whatever would be amenable at that. Whatever happened to the plan to build that parking structure for downtown?
I'm going to assume it's due to funding, sir. I'm going to assume that was probably scrapped due to funding. I know it's an expensive endeavor for a city to take on a project of building a parking garage, but I don't know the specifics to the issue you're bringing up. But that's what my assumption would be, is due to funding.
Due to funding?
Yes, sir.
All right.
Thank you for your presentation, first and foremost. You guys spoke on many of the areas of concern, but I didn't hear about the Tyco Airport area. It's a large area on the map, and that wasn't addressed.
If you look at...
No, go ahead.
Go ahead. Okay. We're going to go back and forth here. I can point you to page 25 of your packet, which I believe is... Yes, page 25 of your packet. You'll see a map. That is a very conceptual map. That is not a regulatory map at any point in time yet. This is just an idea of how we can, the consultant is proposing an idea of consolidating our land use categories. If you look in the very bottom of that map, you'll see an area there that is shaded all pretty much in a gray color, or like a brown color, orangish brown color, and it's called research and manufacturing. That's the label. So that whole area there, including the Tyco Airport, the consultant is suggesting that there would be a consolidated land use for that area that we could use to accommodate research and manufacturing type uses there in a much more streamlined and easier fashion than we currently have. So it's a place that we can really market if we have the right land use for that entire area. So that's what the consultant is included here.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. The shoreline restoration, what is the status of that at the present time?
The shoreline protection ordinance?
Yeah.
It's been adopted by City Council.
Okay. And when does that, how does that get implemented?
Well, the shoreline protection ordinance was meant to regulate development on private properties. That was not an initiative or that ordinance did not contain initiatives that the city would take on as far as making improvements to the shoreline. So that was regulating the amount of impervious surfaces, how stormwater is treated, what kind of plantings are appropriate on private property. But that's really what that was intended to address. It was never intended to establish a work program or anything like that for the city to accomplish projects. And so that's been implemented, and it's enforceable at this point.
With that in mind, the last meeting we had, we talked about the damage to the park there on the northwest side of the Max Brewer Bridge, where all of that concrete has been lifted. And obviously, the retention of the seawall is kind of, as anything, I know they've marked it off since we brought it up at the last meeting. They've taped it so that people will not go on there, but what happens there?
We have to get back with you on that one. I believe that is another agency that's going to be dealing with that. Either it's FDOT or the county, or in collaboration with both of them on that issue. There's a lot of damage there, and so yeah. Okay. Well, we can certainly find out and give you some information about that.
Thank you. Okay, and who is, I think.
Thank you. We'll take your comments on this and bring it back to the consultant and make some additional revisions, and this will come back to you again. The next item starts on page 26 of your packet, and that's B, and that's called the Parallel Flood Policies and Coastal Management element of the comprehensive plan. So just so you understand, we are supposed to come up with an evaluation and appraisal review, an EAR, every 7 years to evaluate the status of our comprehensive plan and identify policies that need to be updated and amended as a result of new changes to state law since the last time we did this. Item C is really the total encompassing of all of that. It includes the EAR. There is a request for an action to be taken on item C, and I'll explain what that is when we get to that agenda item. We pulled out a portion of that EAR report, mainly dealing with amendments to the coastal management element of the existing comprehensive plan now, and pulled it out into agenda item B, which is I'm going to show you now. Now, the reason is when we did our review of the comprehensive plan and any statutory requirements that were adopted since the last time we did this EAR process, we realized that there is a very important law that was enacted in 2015. It has to do with addressing redevelopment and development of properties and of managing our public assets along the waterfront due to storm surge due to hurricanes and to flooding and to sea level rise. And so the state is requiring us to adopt certain policies to address these issues. And I'll go through a few slides here to kind of describe what that statute requires and how we are addressing it. Just so you know, we do have a public meeting on next Monday this Monday coming up with the public. We've invited, it's just with the staff and the public, we invited people who own property along the water to come and hear the same presentation and ask any questions they might have about this. And of course, we'll obviously have maybe another follow-up meeting with the public about this. If on your next agenda item, the evaluation and appraisal review report is approved and the EAR-based amendments are approved, they'll go on to the City Council at their transmittal hearing on Tuesday, this coming Tuesday. And if that's approved, that EAR report and those EAR-based amendments, including this item that I'm going to talk about right now about parallel flood, will go to the state for their review, and they will have a little bit of time to review our amendments and get back to us with comments. And then we'll have another opportunity to go over this again. So this won't be the last time you'll see this. So the Parallel Flood Act was approved in 2015. There are five main policies inside or requirements in the statutes that every jurisdiction that has a coastal management element is required to incorporate into the comprehensive plan. The first item has to do with including development and redevelopment principles, strategies, and engineering solutions that reduce the flood risk in coastal areas which result from high tide events, storm surge, flash flood, stormwater runoff, and the related impacts of sea level rise. Another one has to do with encouraging the use of best practices, development and redevelopment principles, strategies, and engineering solutions that will result in the removal of coastal real property from flood zone designated nations established by the by the Federal Emergency Management Agency. We also have to include policies that address this issue, identify site development techniques and best practices that may reduce losses due to flooding and claims made under flood insurance policies issued in this state. Be consistent with, or more stringent than, the flood-resistant requirements in the Florida Building Code and applicable floodplain management regulations set forth in federal rules. Require that any construction activities seaward of the coastal construction control lines established pursuant to Chapter 161 of the Florida statutes be consistent with that statute. This doesn't really address, or we don't really have to address this particular policy because we're not on the Atlantic Ocean. The last one, encourage local governments to participate in the National Flood Insurance Program Community Rating System administered by the Federal Emergency Management Agency to achieve flood insurance premium discounts for their residents. If you're not familiar with this, we participate in the FEMA's federal insurance program, and we have adopted certain policies according to a community rating system manual that FEMA developed. And by adopting those certain policies and building code requirements and land development regulations, we are able to provide a reasonable insurance rate, or homeowners are actually able to get a reasonable insurance rate as a result of our participation in that program. Last year, the FEMA came out with an updated manual, a CRS manual, and it includes a lot of policies that they are asking us to address related to sea level rise. So the word sea level rise are throughout that manual now, and so we have to go back and look at that again and look at our policies and our land development regulations and our building code requirements, see if we need to make any changes to continue to have that or provide our residents and our business owners the same level of insurance rates in a city. So that will be another project in the future that the building department will be dealing with. There are several jurisdictions that have successfully adopted these amendments with the approval of the Department of Economic Opportunity, which is the state's land planning agency. St. Petersburg, Treasure Island, Madeira Beach, South Pasadena, Miami Beach, and Tampa, and among several others. There are many jurisdictions that have not been very successful adopting these policies, mainly because they did not address the issue of redevelopment. Let me just give you an example of, illustrates an example of a policy that the city of St. Petersburg adopted and proposed. There is not a standard set of policies that every jurisdiction can just copy and paste and approve. They are very specific to our jurisdiction. We did look at several other jurisdictions, including St. Petersburg, Clearwater, Fernandina Beach, and several others, to see what they got passed, and we selected policies that we thought were most relevant to the city of Titusville. So what we included was some underlined language that we put into that coastal management element, which I'll point out to you on page 32 of your packet, and that's where it starts. The city of St. Petersburg simply just came up with some policies that they thought would pass DEO, including language that says that they'll come up with a work strategy, basically, to deal with these issues. They did not. They did get an objection from DEO that they did not specifically address the issue of sea level rise in their policies in the comprehensive plan, and they came back and revised that. They require that any and then the other issue was that St. Petersburg was successful in stating that they are not on the Gulf of Mexico, and they did not have to address the issue related to require that any construction activities seaward of the coastal construction zone be consistent with Chapter 161 of the statutes. We're in that same boat. We're not on the Atlantic coast, so therefore we don't have to address that particular policy. So we're addressing really only 5 policies out of 6, or requirements 5 out of 6 requirements in this statute. City of St. Petersburg's response to some of the objections of DEO included language that specifically addressed high tide events, storm surge, flash flood, stormwater runoff, and the impacts related to sea level rise. So DEO wants to see this specific kind of language inside the policies. This again just deals, this is St. Petersburg's response to DEO about the fact that they're not on the Gulf of Mexico and they did not have to address that requirement.
Excuse me.
Yes, sir.
What is the city's thinking at the present time addressing the issues in terms of sea rise? What do they expect us to do as a community? How is it going to affect us in terms of what we have to write up in anticipation of sea? In other words, what I'm trying to say is, are we going to come up with a specific do's and don'ts or building codes specifically for our area here, and how is that going to impact those projects that we do? Right now we do have buildings, we do have along the river. How are we going to adjust those, and how does that tie into what they want us to do?
The policies that we are proposing will address, will ask the city to look at its assets, its public facilities, especially along those properties that may be impacted as a result of sea level rise, flooding, and storm surge from hurricanes. And then identify, we would need to look at those and identify whether we can mitigate them in a short term or we need to remove them or move some certain facilities. Yes, sir.
We're not on the ocean. Okay, we're on the river. So is that going to make, how is that going to work as opposed to St. Petersburg or Clearwater that are right there on the Gulf? How do we adjust our thinking? In other words, what do we have to do? How much of an impact are we going to experience here? And how does that work?
In order to find that out, the state, we tried to apply for a grant last year to get a technical assistance, to get a professional to kind of help us out with this last year. We weren't successful with that grant, getting that grant from the state. So we asked the state for Department of Economic Opportunity for assistance. What can we do? And they suggested that, referred us to several types of tools that we could use or models that we could use to help come up with a preliminary analysis of what impact the city of Titusville might experience as a result of sea level rise, for example. And one of those tools was developed by the University of Florida, and it's called the Sea Level Sketch Planning Tool. We sent a GIS, Geographic Information Specialist, to one of our staff members to go to a training that was offered to a lot of staff members up and down the coast here. And she came back and did a preliminary analysis for us with some maps. We included some of those maps in your packet for you, which start on page 42 of your packet. They are preliminary only. They include, the model included data that was accumulated by NOAA and by the Army Corps of Engineers. And the parameters that were used in the model, we tried to mimic what the East Central Florida Regional Planning Council did when they did the same study and presented that to the Space Coast Transportation Planning Organization a few months ago on the same issue about the impacts to our roadways in the Brevard County. And so we tried to do the same kind of analysis that they did. They also, the city of Satellite Beach also did the same thing prior to even that Regional Planning Council doing their study. And they've actually are way ahead of the game compared to most other cities in Brevard County. They've come up with a resiliency plan to kind of identify specifically what facilities that they own are going to be impacted. And I throw out this example a lot. It was told to me about the fact that they have a fire station on the west part of their island, there, and it's they thought they were just going to have to mitigate it. And it turns out that when they did a deeper analysis, they're probably going to have to relocate their fire station over time. So they're actually, from what I understand, they're going forward to try and plan that out and budget for that. So right now at this stage, we just used a model that was recommended to us by DEO. We came up with some maps, which I included in the packet to you, that include those that identify generally areas along city coast that will be impacted by a Category 1 and up to a Category 5 hurricane and the storm surge resulting from that. And then there are other maps that just look at the impacts of the properties as a result of sea level rise in the next century. And all it is just, it's a preliminary level right now. It helped us inform the policies that we've come up with and I'm proposing tonight. In order to go further with this, to really get into the details as to what we really need to do, we are suggesting that we would come up with some kind of strategic plan to implement these policies. We're not at that stage yet. All we are right now is we need to get these policies past the state's review. And then, of course, the City Council has to adopt them later on this summer. Once that's done, then we'll go forward with a much more detailed analysis as to what kind of impacts are really going to happen. Because that level of detail, we don't have that kind of data to figure that out just yet. What we have right now is a preliminary view based on a model that was recommended to us by the state. So I hope that answers your question, sir.
To a degree. I'm looking at the map on page 42. Is there a key of some kind? I see the yellow coastal area, the green coastal area, and looking at that map, and then it goes into purple and darker green. What am I looking at here? Am I looking? Is that yellow area a flood area, or
Those areas would be impacted by storm surge, depending on the category hurricane.
So the green is the actual shoreline. I'm looking at, let's see, what page am I on?
42.
Let's see, yeah, 42. And what am I actually looking at there? The green is actually, is that the water, the actual water in the water in the Indian River?
Yes, sir.
And then the yellow, of course, is the low-lying
Yes, sir.
Shoreline.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
I just gave you a snapshot as an example of a map. There are several other maps but I gave you the most relevant ones in your packet. This is just a snapshot of the kind of map that shows sea level rise compiled. So I gave you each of these sea level rise maps starting on page 43 of your packet. And so the next 3 maps after that are combined in this image I'm showing to you right now in one particular area of the city. So my point here in showing this map is that we did a preliminary analysis using this tool, looking at the date of 2040, again to 2060, again to 2080, and then again all the way the last map going to the next century. And so it just shows gradually, based on the data that was included in that model, which properties generally will be impacted as a result of sea level rise only. It does not look at, in these particular maps, include other issues that might be a result of storm surge. But you can imagine if you lay that on top of some of these later maps, there'll be more properties impacted by storm surge because of the sea level rise starting out at a much higher level in the future. So that kind of detailed analysis, I think, will happen later on when we come up with a strategic plan in order to implement these policies.
Okay, I remember I briefly touched on it last meeting when we were talking about sea rise. Our present waterfront, okay, not on the ocean side, but Indian River for the city. How are we planning for the future now with new construction? I mean, my point is we're going to be behind the curve if we don't come up with something soon. And the way our city is growing and the population increase that they expect in the not too distant future, how are we going to implement the policies with the buildings that we already have, let alone the empty properties that there aren't that many that we can build on? But how is this going to work?
The state is requiring us with these policies to address the issue of redevelopment. So the property that's already developed, if it's going to be redeveloped in any way due to whatever reason, would have to meet new regulations depending on whether that property is in an area that identified as vulnerable. New development on property that is vacant, that would be identified as vulnerable, would have to meet new requirements. What those requirements will be fleshed out at a later date and put into our land development code and also in our building code.
How long into the future you're looking at? And what I mean by that is if you take, we don't have that many vacant properties right now on the river. So how long does it take to implement that policy? And what concerns me, if you remember, I spoke last time that if we're going to develop properties and we expect sea rise to happen, I'm just wondering if we're going to have policies where you don't have a ground floor, where ground floor is used for parking. That's the type of thing that I think we should address, because if you take the Imperial Towers, okay, which is, that's another question. What happens to almost all of our shorelines developed at the present time. So how are we going to protect against? What's the plan to protect the properties that are already there?
When the policies will help us go forward with that next step. At this point, I can't answer that question other than to say what is allowed by code. But this process will help us answer that question for you. I can't say when that will be completed. I think the first stage is really to get into the details and really figure out which specific properties are going to be impacted and how we should address that with recommendations. And then the next step after that is to come up with the regulations that would be necessary if the city wants to go forward with that.
I guess what I'm thinking is the properties now that need to be developed, that will be developed in the near future. So how long are we talking about? My point is we should really be making plans today for that eventuality. So if someone comes to you with a plan now, do you address that issue with them?
We address it based on what the current ordinances and laws are in effect today. If this comprehensive plan is adopted, any policies in there that were coded may be in conflict with the policies that would be adopted, the comprehensive plan takes effect over our land development regulations. So I could throw out an example here. There's a policy in there that addresses identifying or prohibiting certain types of uses that are probably not going to be appropriate in areas that would be impacted over time. So why put the city in a position of having to deal with an evacuation of a type of use along the water that we already know is going to be impacted? So why take on that kind of liability? So there are some uses that are proposed in a policy here that will address that issue. If the policy is adopted and the land development code, and we're just taking a long time to bring the land development code up to be consistent with that policy takes precedent. By law, we're not allowed to do anything in violation of the comprehensive plan. That's the best answer I can give you, sir.
What I'm thinking of is the Searstown Mall, which I think, they're trying to salvage it, but I don't know how long that's going to work out. But if you took a property like that and you develop it, it seems to me like we should be planning where we put parking on the ground floor on any building that's built east of Hopkins. I mean, we're talking about 50 years from now, 60 years from now. We're not talking about 10 years. So I'm wondering if we're thinking that far ahead with new construction. What's it going to look like? And I bring that up not to be argumentative, but I really do feel like when you're within a half a mile or quarter of a mile of the river, you need to seriously think about the future and what it's going to look like. And I'm just wondering if we're addressing that in the code today. Like I said, I really do think that we need to look that far ahead. And when we approve new construction, I don't think we should have stores and storefronts right on US 1. That to me is that's just inviting disaster down the road.
We can certainly look at that as a policy change. Yeah, we can do that. My
point is, this is the time to do it. You're talking about redevelopment, along the shoreline, and if we have to think forward of what the future is going to look like, we just can't look at it, 5-10 years from now. We need to really look at the data and see what the possibility is of a sea rise. How much sea rise we're looking at? 3 feet?
We were estimating, I think, 2 feet at the end. That's the worst case scenario.
That's the worst case scenario.
Yes.
Well, I hope that's all there is. I mean, it seems to me that do we really know that? I mean, is that?
No, we don't. I mean, there are estimates of up to 6 feet. There are estimates of below that. I mean, right now, based on the analysis that we did, we're estimating we're going to have to really deal with issues as far as our facilities and come up with some policies in our code and our building code, because at 2 feet, we're going to have a lot of problems. That's where we see it. So if you want to look at other analysis that are out there, other than what the study we did, some estimates bring it up to 6 feet. So
I was going to say,
I don't know.
Yeah, that's what I've read. Okay, the possibility of going from 2 to 3 feet to 6 feet. Okay, so I don't know where the data comes from. I haven't done the research. I don't know where these folks come from but I've read these potential catastrophic sea rise level, and all I'm saying is that I hope as planners, okay, that we look at that and just keep the possibilities in mind instead of saying, well, we're only going to have 2 feet. We don't know that. There's no way to determine that we're going to have 2 feet. So if we're going to put up buildings along the shore, we need to think different. We need to think of really putting, in my opinion, parking, okay, on ground floor level, and your first floor starts up on the first floor above your parking deck, or whatever you want to put underneath your building. But my point is, we talk about visioning, looking forward to the future. We need to do visioning. We really need to. That's what visioning is about: is looking forward, planning for the grand, the grand scheme of things. And we shouldn't be doing short term. I really don't think we should be doing short term. Thank you. John.
I got a problem with, on page 28 of the 220, the strategies and policies, 1.11 is the same as 1.117. It's kind of repetitive.
Do that again.
They're both saying the same thing.
Do that again.
The policy 111 is the same as the strategy on 1117. If you look and read both of the statements, they're both saying the same thing. Page 28. I read that over at home twice and 3 times, and I kept looking at it and said, wait a minute.
Are you saying the same wording is being used?
It's the same, it's explaining the same thing.
And you're on page 28 of your packet?
Yep.
And so it's policy 1.1.1,
Yeah.
starting with the words erosion and sedimentation control.
And it's the same as the one at the bottom that says 1117.
Where that says best management practices.
Yes.
Okay, so the new policy, best management practices, you're saying is unnecessary.
Shouldn't be. It's already explained in 111.
Okay. I think the Water Resources Department, or I'm sorry, the Public Works Department was recommending something that says this kind of policy, or the strategy rather, because of the base management area plan. I have to.
Yeah, it's the BMAP, the Basin Management Area Planning or something like that.
It's a plan that the city has to follow in order to deal with nutrients, kind of reduce the number of nutrients going into the in-river lagoon.
Martin, that's exactly the same what it's saying down there, too.
Okay. If you believe that, if you see that as repetitive and unnecessary.
I think it's repetitive.
Okay. If you want to make a recommendation, we can delete that.
I just made a recommendation. Yeah. Look at it again. Look at it. It's not necessary. I thought at one time we were trying to clean up all these things or make them more congenial to everybody. Steps repeating and repeating.
Understand? Yeah.
Through each step, we already repeated it in 111, and then turn around and explain it again in 1117. It's the same thing.
Okay.
I want to bring up on page 26 of 220. And I guess I'm looking at summary of explanation and background. If you go through those items that are line item, okay, where it says development and redevelopment. And by reading that, that's exactly what I was talking about, is that you have it here, okay, and it specifically tells you that we really should be looking for the long term. That's on page 26 of 220. And we should be looking for the long-term solutions to the flooding problem. And I bring that up because what's involved here is just not the destruction of the property that's put there, but it's the premium, insurance premiums, that get kind of outrageous when you have a flooding event that destroys everything on your waterfront. It makes it intolerable for the community to spend hundreds of millions of dollars. We have to go begging to the federal government to help mitigate or rebuild our waterfront. And so I want to emphasize is that in the future when we're planning for waterfront properties, I don't know how far inland a flood would go. I have no clue how far up from US 1 on the river that we would experience damage. I have no idea what a big surge would do there. But my point is, and I can't emphasize this enough, is that whatever we do for redevelopment, whatever we put in the code, I really don't think that any of those buildings should be ground floor buildings. I know that's a high bar, and that's a difficult thing to impose on a builder or an apartment building or a commercial building. But if we're really serious about sea rise level, then we need to seriously look at eliminating that ground floor development.
I've got a question, about what you're saying. If the ground floor is totally developed for just parking, if the water is rising to that level, what good is the rest of the building? If the water is up into the parking area and you can't park there, how are you going to get access to the building as well? I mean, if the water's that high, you really shouldn't have any building at all on the property. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Well, no, I understand exactly what you're saying, because I've thought about that. But my point is, I don't think, what I'm saying is you're not going to have people abandon their properties on the river. That's not going to happen. So if you're going to put up a new building, okay, at least make it so that anyone who's living above on the second floor is safe. I mean, as long as there's no fire and they have power, they're going to be safe until such time as the water recedes and they can be rescued from there. But my point is the damage on first floor on the river, it would just be catastrophic. I mean, it'd be the entire waterfront.
But he's talking about sea level rise. If the sea level rises to that point, it's not going to subside. It's not going to go back. You're talking about sea level rising to a certain point, and that's where the sea level is going to be.
Well, I would say for the next 50, 60 years, I don't think we're going to see 3 feet of water. I really don't think.
Right.
I don't think we're going to see that type of flooding. But I think a storm event, I certainly think you could see 3 feet of water in US 1. I mean, I really believe that you could see that. I don't think, though, that would be a permanent situation. If that's the case, we all better start moving to the mountains.
According to geologists, we're in trouble anyways. If the ice cap keeps melting, it will happen before 50 years.
The only thing is, I don't want to see us redevelop our waterfront, okay, on US 1 and spend all this money and have all of this new construction, okay, only to see it disappear with one storm. That's my point. Sorry.
So I think that 2.1.2 is meant to be like anything that could be would need to be evacuated. So I just don't think that it's probably inclusive enough. You might want to say any inpatient facility. And I don't know if you want to include zoos also. I mean, that was a problem on some of the hurricanes recently where zoo animals got out because they had to be just let out. But I want to make sure we're not over-rotating on this whole 100 years, 100 years from now or 300 years from now or whatever. I don't think it's reasonable to say you can't build anything on US 1. I think if we're trying to grow the city and redevelop, then saying you can't build anything on US 1 is very short-sighted. But for a broader question, how do you want us to give you these kind of wordsmithing or additions to this language? Because if we go page by page, we're going to be here till next Wednesday.
We understand that. We did not intend to go through all this page by page. We want to just give you the highlights, the main points of it. Obviously, if you have any specific line item changes that you would like to see,
Can we just email you?
you can do that, and we'll share that with the group. Absolutely.
Great.
Yeah, with the entire commission. And at your next meeting, we'll see how we can address those issues, if there's concerns of yours. Absolutely.
Great.
The main points of this you'll see is just the kind of things that you'll see in land regulations or building code regulations, if anything, or other policies and projects that we may do, are going to be a capital improvements program, long-term, looking at this to see what kind of facilities we need to either mitigate or move or replace, which properties are going to be, private properties are going to be impacted, how they should be regulated in such a way so that we're not creating a liability for the city. And then also we want to address the issue of low-impact development. That's a concept that we'd like to present to you, maybe at another meeting, and just give you a short presentation about what that is. A lot of communities are coming up with some standards that deal with stormwater treatment, and so there are a lot of new ways of dealing with that. So there are a lot of tools out there, a lot of things that we can do, a lot of approaches we can come up with to help mitigate these issues going in the future. But if we don't do anything now, it'll just be a much bigger problem for the city later on. So a lot of communities are ahead of the game, and they're doing things now. A lot of communities are not, and so they're going to be hurt later on, I think. So we just want to touch on the highlights to you, that's all.
I have a question. The new mall, okay, and the Searstown Mall, whatever the developers decide to do there, when they come to you and they say, okay, we're going to redevelop, are you talking about sea rise level to them at all? I mean, at the present time, does that enter the picture at all when they come to you and they say, okay, we're going to redevelop the mall and this is what's going to happen? I mean,
if they come in with a redevelopment plan, I believe we will have that conversation with them about that. If, going forward with these policies, yes, sir.
Okay, but you have not up until this point?
No, sir.
Okay. That's what Going forward, I think that needs to be a discussion, and part of the comprehensive plan is that even though I'm sure as a planning department you're going to come up with specifics about how this is going to work, but I do think that needs to be a discussion from here on in so that we are not wiped out with a real sad situation where we spend 10 years trying to recover from a storm, recover our downtown. And that's what really needs to be avoided in the future. You look at New Orleans and low-lying areas, I mean, they're still struggling to recover. And that's the one thing that we don't want to do in the future. Oh, I'm sorry. Any other questions for staff? Seeing none. So what do we do? Now, this is just a recommendation. Is that correct?
Well, this item we brought out separately because we just want to talk about it only, about particular goals that we're putting into this coastal management element. We just want to get your input. The next agenda item is the evaluation and appraisal review report and ear-based amendments. So if you agree with these policies that we've introduced here, they are rolled in right now into the next agenda item, which on that next agenda item, we're actually asking for action to recommend that the ear-based amendments be transmitted to the state for review. So in closing on this particular item, item B, parallel flood policies, again, we're going to have a public meeting on Monday, the 7th, with the public, and there's a transmittal hearing before the City Council on the 8th. We actually already gave them a separate presentation on this particular issue at a previous meeting, so they're well aware of it as well. And again, it'll all come back to you again. So, I'm sorry?
Meeting will be held here.
Yes, sir. That's right.
So any feedback we have on this that we want to get in, we need to get to you this week before that meeting on Monday.
If you want it included as part of any changes to DEO, we can certainly try and do that before we transmit and make sure we'll have to give City Council an understanding of what you would like to see changed. Otherwise, you can wait until after we get our, or during the review that DEO is going to conduct. And then when we get their responses back, we can also make any changes based on their comments and your comments. We can roll it all in together and resubmit it back to them. So we can have another meeting in the interim with you about this issue if you like, to talk about any particular comments that did not we didn't have a chance to send off to DEO. We can make this as convenient, however you like to do it.
On page 3 of 9,
Which page in your packet are you talking about, sir?
I'm sorry, page 52.
Okay.
Page 52 of 220.
Oh, okay, so we're on the next agenda item?
Well, we kind of touched on it, so.
Okay. Well, I can give you a short presentation on the last agenda item, this third one. It's real short, and I'm just going to touch the highlights. I'm not going through everything in this. Just so you know, this is the report that we're going to send to the state. It's our analysis, basically stating that we don't believe there are any specific changes we need to make to the comprehensive plan based on current issues. We don't need to change land uses on any particular property or increase densities. We believe that our growth rate is, and our available capacity in our facilities will accommodate new growth that we believe will come to the city in the next 10 years. So the only changes that you'll see in this next agenda item are primarily those that we believe bring the comprehensive plan into becoming consistent with state law. And I'll just point out the main ones in my presentation. I won't go through it line by line, unless you would like me to. Okay. All right, so this agenda item tonight is a public hearing. It's the evaluation and appraisal review. It's and we're asking for your recommendation to send this to the City Council with a recommendation that it be transmitted to the state for their review, so we can get their review started at least. And that meeting is going to be on May 8th, Tuesday, in the council chambers. What is an EAR? It is a requirement that every jurisdiction has to do every 7 years to evaluate the status of the comprehensive plan and to propose changes to the policies that bring the plan to become consistent with state law. The comprehensive plan includes several elements or chapters, if you will. We're not, contrary to the very first presentation we gave you, what we're sending to the state is just what we currently have right now as far as the format. So you see the very first chapter, if you will, is the future land use element. The second one is a transportation element. We have a housing element, infrastructure element, conservation element, a coastal management element, which I already addressed, an intergovernmental coordination element, a recreation and open space element, which we are not changing, a capital improvements element, which you already saw back in December, and we're just submitting to the state now, and you already approved back then. And then lastly is a public schools facilities element. That one we're proposing some changes, but they're primarily have to deal with removing some redundant language and just making a reference over to our interlocal agreement that we have with the school district. The most significant element, obviously, is the one I just went over in the previous agenda item, and that's the new parallel flood policies. Another change that we're proposing is including a reference to a regional water management plan. The local or the regional water management district, which is St. John's River Water Management District here, has a regional water management plan, and we have to make reference to it according to the state law. We've updated language related to the coastal high hazard areas, and that is also in the coastal management element, and it's related to the parallel flood policies. We've also, as I've already mentioned, proposing to delete a lot of language in the school facilities element that we believe are redundant. They were originally included in that element set about 10 years ago, or less than that, asking the city to do an interlocal agreement to deal with school concurrency with the school district. That has been done. We have a 2014 interlocal agreement with the school district addressing that issue with school concurrency. And so we believe a lot of the language that enabled that agreement in the element right now is redundant, and we just make reference over to that agreement in the element now. The next task, if you agree with the changes we've proposed in here, we try to put some comments next to some of the changes in the elements to give you an idea of why we're proposing some of the changes. If you have any questions about those, I'll try and answer them. But basically, we're going to ask that you recommend approval of these EAR-based amendments, and that it be for the City Council to transmit them to the the Land Planning Agency, which is the Department of Economic Opportunity. The LPA will provide any objections, if they have any, to us within a certain amount of time. And they'll provide a report to us. We'll have to address those objections. We'll bring them to you so you can see them, and we'll have suggestions on how we can address those objections, if any. We anticipate having adoption public hearings possibly in late August or early September this year. And we will continue to work with Canaan on the vision-based amendments, which we proposed to you at the first presentation. We do not have to provide those vision-based amendments that we showed to you in the very first presentation to the Department of Economic Opportunity. We are only sending those element changes that bring the comprehensive plan and consistent with state law to the Department of Economic Opportunity. The big item, obviously, is the parallel flood policies. That's the end of this presentation. I'll try and answer any questions you have about this or any other questions you might have on topic. Thank you.
I have a question for you. On page 3 of 9.
3 of 9, you're talking about page 50 of the packet?
52, I'm sorry,
52?
page 52.
Okay.
Page 220. If you go down to line 16 through 23, and there's a paragraph there starting with concurrency.
Yes, sir.
Can you explain, has the state loosened up its regulations or its clamp on the cities so that now you can kind of have a little flexibility in determining who, how, what, when, where, and why you want to do something?
When we adopted our EAR-based amendments the last time, I think it was in 2010, in 2011, the state came back and made significant changes to the growth management law. And that included making several concurrency-related facilities, such as transportation concurrency, school concurrency, and parks concurrency, optional. So the local jurisdiction does not have to have concurrency inside its comprehensive plan related to schools, parks, and transportation. However, if they are in your comprehensive plan, you must abide by them, obviously. So we can certainly make those optional. We're not proposing deleting them or removing them in these EAR-based amendments now. We would like to look at them in the future, though, but we have not addressed that issue here.
I'm assuming this was done because there was some complaint or some, in other words, they thought the state was coming too close to telling local governments what to do. Was that
That's my understanding
basically what happened here? Because that was a big issue. You know, the cities, after all, we do pay taxes. We want our money spent a certain way and certain types of development. And I just saw that. It kind of surprised me in a way. It kind of surprised me when they clamped down and said you couldn't do anything unless it was approved by the state. But now I see that they've changed that, which I'm very grateful for. And I think that that's the way to progress and have things done the way the people who live here want them done, as opposed to the state dictating the terms. And I'm assuming that that's what that paragraph referenced. Thank you. Do we have any more questions of staff? I'm sorry.
On page 172 of 220, there's a recommendation to strike the section about the city having a policy to fund the stormwater management system. It says in the comment, the stormwater utility fee has already been implemented. Is it necessary to keep this? I would recommend that you do keep the verbiage so that someone down the road can't, remove that fee, and then you don't have a mechanism to fund the program. So I would recommend that you not strike that language. That's it.
Any other questions of staff? Does staff have any comments?
We just appreciate your patience and looking at all this information. We will try and break this up in the future in separate presentations to you to make it a little easier. But I really do appreciate you taking the time to look at all this and your patience this evening.
Mr. Page?
Do we make a motion now?
We'll need a motion on this one, yes.
I'll make a motion to send this to City Council. I've lost my page here. Okay, where does this start?
Page 26, I believe, isn't it?
Is it 26?
Yeah, I think it's 26.
No, it's,
The agenda item.
Page 47.
Yes.
Move this on to City Council. Item C, Category 9. Is that all I need to do? I make a motion to move this to City Council.
I'll second the motion.
Roll call, please.
Dr. Faison?
Yes.
Secretary Chambers?
Yes.
Vice Chairman Shavir?
Yes.
Member Noel Copeland?
Yes.
Member Faison?
Yes.
Member Ritchie?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you very much. I just want the public to understand that there will be a public meeting about the parallel flood policies that we just presented to you tonight on Monday at 6 p.m. in this room. And then the transmittal hearing before City Council will be that Tuesday night at 6:30. And the vision-based amendments that the consultant is proposing will give a presentation in this room that same night at 6:30 before City Council on Tuesday.
Another question for you. Bay Towers, okay, and Royal Oak. Status changed at all since our last meeting?
Bay Towers, well, I don't know.
I'm not sure what update I gave you at the last meeting regarding Bay Towers. I thought that we reviewed that the code enforcement settlement had gone through and the city has put into compliance all of the prior existing code enforcement violations from 2008. That settlement payment has been received and closed out by the city. This is with respect to Bay Towers. There's no current issue on the table that I'm aware of that my office is dealing with Bay Towers.
So that building is ready for occupancy?
I wouldn't go that far. I would say that the owners are still working on clearing that property for occupancy, but there's no pending code enforcement violation that is in need of correction. They've corrected all of the immediate life safety issues, and they're working with the building department with active building permits to restore that property.
Very cool.
I did some research for the question regarding Royal Oak. After 2.5 years of litigation, it's still in continuing litigation. There has not been a resolution to the foreclosure issue between the two brothers that are arguing about who owns the property. There's a foreclosure that has to be resolved before I can give you an update on that. And I don't see a hearing date scheduled on that case.
Thank you. Any other questions, staff?
Mr. Shapiro, I have another
I'm sorry.
meeting that
Member here, please.
that Mr. Lindman has asked me to make public. So I'll read what he said, okay? Please let the citizens of Titusville, excuse me, know that there is a town hall style meeting on Monday, May 7th. So another one at 7 o'clock at Jackson Middle School. The purpose of the meeting is for Brevard Public Schools to get community input on arming employees in a Guardian program. So that was a discussion at the school board meeting on Tuesday. Below is a link, and there's a link in there that talks about what went on. Brevard Schools seek staff, family input on arming staff guardians. Then he goes on to say the board process will include a survey, staff meetings, and town hall style meetings with the public across the Space Coast. The board tentatively will vote on the proposal May 8th, which is the very next day. The public can attend any of the following meetings, and they're in 6 different schools, but the one that's relevant to us is Jackson. And that's at 7 to 8:30 on Monday. Then he goes on to say, the school board meeting Tuesday drew a large organized crowd and dozens of passionate speakers over 5.5 hours. Before the meeting, BPS, or Brevard Public Schools, surveyed the district employees to gauge their eligibility and willingness to participate in the Guardian program. It received 1,007 responses from all types of staff from Friday through Monday. 707 responses from eligible administrators, support staff, and other school-based professionals that don't teach. And they indicated a high enough level of volunteerism to field an initial class of guardian trainees if the board chooses to proceed. And that's basically it. So if any of the parents or public are concerned about the Guardian program, then they need to attend that meeting from 7 to 8:30. Okay?
Thank you.
But
Anything else?
weird. Guns in the schools.
Seeing no other questions? Yes.
What about the old hotel where El Lancito used to be? Is there any progress with that apartment building?
I'm not sure of the status of the building permit on that. They had active building permits for some time. We can look and let you know, but I'm not sure what the status is on that currently.
The old hotel where El Lancito used to be?
I spoke with the code enforcement manager earlier this week, and we obtained the contact information so that he could make sure that that property remains in compliance. I don't know if that's your concern, is the appearance.
I'm just wondering if they're going to start
the last
fixing
correspondence on the building permit was received in March, and so there is activity, and they do have an active engineer of record, but I don't know any more specifics other than the most recent contact.
Any other questions? Okay. Meeting's adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you all.